Hey guys, welcome to my video. Today we are going to be doing part 1 of a series called Junk Journal Junkie Basics. And we are going to go through the start to finish of building a journal, the Junk Journal Junkie way. So today I have a few of my basic materials laid out for you guys to look at. And I always try to keep all of this stuff linked in the descriptions below because I know you guys enjoy looking at those things, so I will have it all linked below. But today we're going to start out with some basic book board, and I buy mine off of Amazon because that's just so super easy for me. I will have it linked below, like I said. And usually I can get a whole junk journal out of one of these pieces. How big are these? That's a great question. 12.5 by 10 inches. So that is our first supply. This is going to be the front, back, and spine of our junk journal. I have some cotton, quilter's cotton. I think this is called broadcloth. It is super thin. Excuse me. It is super thin, lightweight fabric. I mean, it's almost so thin that you can see through it. But this is what we're going to use to cover the journal, and it's going to provide the support that we need in the hinge gaps. You could use thicker fabric, but I find it's a little bit harder to get a neat, clean look around the edges and corners. So that's what I've got here. I do not remember where I bought this. It was probably from Joann's before it closed, but literally any fabric store is going to have this. And then I have my PVA glue. This is the brand that I use. It's a little pricey, but I do really like this glue. You could also use like Elmer's glue. That's not super important that you have a pH neutral glue for this. But this is what I have and what I use. I'll have it linked below. It's also an Amazon buy. And then you need a good ruler and a cutting knife. And I also have my brush to brush my glue on. And I think that's about it. That's all we need to put this journal together. Well, I should say the cover of this journal together. So we're just gonna jump right in and get started. Step 1 is to decide what size you want your journal to be. You can make a journal any size that you would like. I usually base the size of my journal off of the size papers that I'll be putting in it, but literally it can be any size that you want it to be. Today the journal I'm going to be making is going to be 19 by 13 centimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out my 19. So 19. Now that I have that marked a few spots along the way, I'm going to line up my ruler across those marks and make my cut. Okay, so now we have a piece of board that is 19 centimeters tall, and now we need to cut the width out for our front and back covers. And then usually what I do is the piece that I have left over will be the width of my spine, but we may not make our spine quite that big this time. We will decide that in a moment. So we're going to set that piece aside for later while we work on the width of our journal, which is going to be 13. So I'm going to do the same thing and measure out a few cut lines at 13 centimeters. And then cut that. Okay, and then there we have the front cover, or one cover of our journal cut out. And then I'm gonna do the same thing and measure out 13 again for the opposite cover. Make a few cut marks. And then cut that piece. And then we have our covers cut. And when you stack them up, they should be just about perfect. So those are looking good. Now we're gonna set those aside and decide on our spine width. Now today, since I had this perfect little piece that's already cut out the same height as our journal covers, we're gonna use this little piece as our spine. A lot of times I don't have this much left over on the edge, but today with the measurements that I used, I did. So we are gonna use this little guy as our spine, and let's see how thick we're gonna make this guy. I think we're gonna go for 5 centimeters across, so we're gonna need to make a little cut on this piece. It's currently sitting at about 5.5 centimeters. So let's make that cut at 5. And cut that a little bit off of the edge there. All right. Now you could save this and use it to make some little faux bands across your spine if you wanted to. That might be cute. I don't think that's the way I'm gonna go for today's journal. I have done that in the past, and it is so cute, super cute to have your little faux bands that go across the spine. So you could save this little piece to use for that, but I am going to choose to go with a plain spine today. But that is it for our book board cuts. We have 3 pieces now. That will be the front cover, back cover, and the spine of our journal. So this is, excuse me. So this is what it will look like sort of laid out. It's going to be a cute little smaller size journal. To just give you a little bit of reference, this is what like a standard sheet of copy paper looks like, and then there it is compared to our little journal cover. So this is a smaller sized journal than what I would normally make. Let me show you or give you the measurements for like a standard size journal. So for example, let's say we wanted to make a standard size journal that would fit a regular sheet of notebook paper or copy paper. So I'll have one of each here, just a sheet of notebook paper and copy paper for size reference. If I were making this journal to fit these pages specifically, to get my measurements, I would line the papers up with the edge of the book board here. And it comes right to 14 centimeters. And then I would add 1/2 of a centimeter to the edge of that to give myself enough leeway for binding the books and to have a little bit of space along the edge. the foredge of the book. And then I would do the same thing at the top and bottom. So the measurements for this book would be, get myself lined up here, 23 centimeters by 14.5. So 23 by 14.5 would be kind of my standard size journal. But we're working on a little mini guide today. So here's what our example looks like today. But just keep that in mind that you can cut your board to any size that you would choose to. A lot of people go ahead and put their signatures together and have their text block ready to go, and then measure and cut their journal cover to fit that. I usually kind of work in reverse, and I cut and make my cover first, and then trim my pages to fit. So I think it just kind of depends on your personal preference as far as that's concerned. Now that we have our pieces cut, it is time to put them together. And we do that using fabric. So I have my fabric here. I'm gonna fold it out and cut a little piece for us to use. So I'm just gonna cut a little bit here for us to get going with. I did not cut that straight at all. That's fine. Okay. And then I'll give ourselves a little bit more room down here to work too. Okay. All right, so here's what we have. We have a piece of broadcloth or quilter's cotton or whatever fabric you choose to cover your book in. We're gonna lay that out, and just to show you, I have a lot of room around the edge right now to work, to give myself plenty of space for when I start gluing this down. Everything we'll have plenty of room to work, because we will eventually trim this down even farther, but when you're gluing things down, you just want to have plenty of room to work in case something gets off slightly and shifts. We won't end up too close to the edge, because what we need is enough fabric to fold over all of the edges and glue it down. So that's what we're going to work on next. I will say, when you're using a really thin fabric like this, glue seepage through your fabric is something that you want to pay attention to. For this journal, I'm not really concerned about that, because I'm going to be covering this journal with another medium, and it probably will end up being kind of a mixed media sort of cover. So I'm going to be putting lots of things on top of this. You're not going to see any of this fabric, so if the glue seeps through, it's not a big issue for me. If it is a problem for you and you want a really smooth, clean look with no like wet glue spots poking through your fabric, you might want to take the time to make yourself some book cloth, which is really easy to do, and there's lots of tutorials about that. You can search on YouTube, and I might make a video about that later on. Today I'm not so worried about it, so we're just going to continue on with reckless abandon in our glue. Because we're not worried so much about that. I'm going to be covering all this up later. Oh, another thing that you will probably want to have if you are going to be in this junk journal world and plan on making a good many junk journals are some guides for your hinge gap spaces. Let me show you the ones I use. I bought this little set on Amazon, and it has been worth its weight in gold. These are just little acrylic guides. This is like a right angle, and then you have all of these little T-shapes, and they're different widths. Let me show you. So when you buy your package, it comes with all these little T-shapes, and then it has all of these little just flat rectangles with no T's on the top. And so all of these are different thicknesses. So you've got some really wide ones, you got some really narrow ones, and these are all for spacing out your hinge gaps. So you would put them here, and then they have the right angles on the top so that you can keep everything in line and even going across your journal, and it puts the perfect amount of space for your hinge gaps. Now you use the T for one, and then it comes with the coordinating, and I probably can't find the exact one that I'm looking for right now, but each one of these has a matching piece that goes this way. Oh, I know what happened to my other one. Here it is. My cat's using it as a cat toy right now. I rarely use this little tiny one, but so it has the coordinating one to go here, so that when you're lining everything up, you can make sure that you have exactly the right amount of space in your hinge gaps, and that everything is going to be aligned properly at the top and bottom. So if you're going to be making a good many junk journals, this is a pretty inexpensive and really useful tool to have. And I'll have it linked. I found this on Amazon. I think they have them on Etsy too. So just wherever you like to shop, you probably could find these little guys. Today I'm going to be using, I like a fairly good hinge gap in mine. So the one that I usually go for is, okay, I found it. It's the one that I use all the time, so I did not put it back in its proper spot, which makes complete sense. So this is the one that I prefer to use, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes I don't even use this little guy. I will glue these first pieces down together and then move this one over, because I like to have that right angle at the top to keep me straight. So this is the 1 centimeter. I've got glue all over it. Like this is the one that I love and use all the time. So we're gonna use that. And let me get my glue pot. And we are gonna get started gluing this guy down. How much glue? I don't know. I guess you can always pour more. All right, so we have our glue. We have our brush. We have our guides for our hinge gaps. And let me find something to put down to protect my surface a little bit, so I'm not cleaning glue up from everything in the world here. All right. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and brush a good layer of glue across the book board. You want to make sure that you get it covered completely. You do not want to be missing any spots, because anywhere that you miss gluing, you will have bubbling fabric on your finished journal. So that's not what we want. So take your time and make sure that you get good glue coverage all over every part of your book board. And you'll see I'm not being overly careful with this. Like I said, I'm not worried about glue getting on my fabric and peeking through, but if you are, you're going to want to take your time and be very careful doing this and make sure that you get good even coverage of glue, but you don't want any really thick spots of glue like that are going to seep through your fabric on the opposite side. So make sure that you take your time, get a good glue coverage, but also not too thick in any spots. But today we can glue with reckless abandon, which is the kind of journal I enjoy making, when I can just create and not worry about making a mess. And this glue dries rather fast, so usually by the time I get a whole even coat of glue, it's time to go back and kind of freshen up a few spots. I'm being a little generous here. This is probably too thick. If you were trying to avoid glue showing through your fabric, you'd want to go a little bit thinner with your glue. or use a book cloth. Book cloth is just fabric that has a protective paper layer on one side so that your glue does not seep through the paper and get to your fabric. So that's all a book cloth is, and you can make that at home. All right, guys. Whoops. We're gonna go ahead and put our first cover down here. That was not straight at all. That's fine. We're gonna shoot for, make sure I'm still kind of sort of lined up so we don't run off the edge of our fabric here. And then we're just gonna make sure we don't have any wrinkles, and we're gonna mush that down real good from this side. Another thing that I have found too is if you mush from this side, you're generally okay with the glue seepage. But if you turn it over and start mushing from the fabric side, you're gonna get some glue smush. Now, in this case, I'm not okay. I put that glue on pretty thick. There's gonna be glue smush no matter what we do on this journal because I put the glue on so heavily, but that's okay for us today. So I'm not worried about it. We're just gonna keep trucking along. All right, I'm gonna move that over. See, it's already, I feel the glue smush. Okay, let's get our little spine down with our hinge gap placement in there. I don't love that edge right there. Let me find my sander. Found it. I'm just gonna sand the edge over the trash can. Had a bit of a rough edge. And we're gonna do the same thing here with the glue. I really appreciate all you guys' kind words and well wishes and prayers for my dad. He's out of the hospital now and he's home, and my mom's taking good care of him. He's still not well. He's been very sick and it's taken him a long time to recover. But I do appreciate every single prayer that you guys sent up for him, and for your concerns about my car too. I appreciate that. That was such a stressful time, not being able to get home when you feel like you need to be there for your family and to be stranded. That was a scary feeling. But my husband came to the rescue. He borrowed a truck, rented a trailer, and he came and loaded his girls up and brought us back to Mississippi. So I am so thankful for that guy. So I'm just going to take this out now that that piece is glued down and move it to the opposite side of our spine. And then we're going to glue down our last piece of bookboard, which will be our back cover. Let's pop this baby into place. And I should mention, when I'm putting these down, I'm making sure there aren't any wrinkles in the fabric. I'm putting a little pressure here and then smoothing the fabric out this direction. And then when I place this down, I try to lift the back edge of this and scoot it right up against that, my little guide here. And then I'm pulling the fabric with my pinky down here, pulling that fabric taut, pushing that board in, and then smushing it down so that everything should be tight and there shouldn't be any wrinkles. And I've done that for the pieces that I've put down. I try to make sure that everything's nice and snug and we don't have wrinkles and everything's aligned properly and we have the proper space for our hinge gap. And I do love that they give you the options to have different thicknesses for your hinge gaps, because if you're using a really thin board and thin fabric, you don't need a huge hinge gap. If you're using a really thick board and a really thick fabric, you might need more of a hinge gap so that you have room for your book to open and close properly. And I'll show you what that looks like when we actually have this book put together and we can close it. I'll show you why you want this hinge gap there and what size you want. Okay, so we have this thing together. She's one piece now. We have quite a bit of glue seepage. I don't know. Ooh, I have a monster wrinkle right there too. We gotta work on that. But glue seepage we're not worried about. You can't really see it too much, can you? It actually did pretty well. You might be able to see a little dark spot right here. Nope. Let's see what we can do about this little wrinkle. I'm just gonna kind of tug on that fabric and see if it will let go for me. And then iron it out with my fingers. I think that might be okay. The glue still feels wet under my fingers, so I think we're still gonna get good contact and I think it's gonna stick. So we should be fine with that little guy. Now that we've got him pressed out. Just making sure that everything is stuck down really well. And then we'll move on to the next step. And I think we're good here. So yeah, we're gonna move this piece. I think we're done with that. And now we are gonna cut some of this excess fabric from around the edges. Okay, so this is 2 millimeters. We don't need a whole bunch of fabric wrapping around the edges, so we're gonna go with this little ruler. I'm just gonna push it up against the edge and then cut along the ruler, pushing it up against the edge of my book board, I should say, and then cutting along the edge of the ruler. So there's what we have, and you can see that we have plenty of room to fold around the edge there. So I'm going to continue doing that and then just trim all of my edges off. Okay. When you get done with that, you should have something that looks like this, all nice and tidy and trimmed up. It's looking good. The next step is to, we're gonna trim some of the fabric away from this edge, because when we start folding this over, we'll fold the head first and then the tail. And then when you come to this side and fold it over, we don't want to end up with all of this fabric here causing bulk issues. So what you do is you cut across here to take away all of that extra fabric, but you want to be sure and leave just enough that you cover this edge, because you don't want this little corner sticking out. So you want enough that covers this little edge, but you don't want so much that you have it hanging over here. And to do this, they have guides that you can use. Like, I'll show you. I just got these. So you don't need these to do this, guys. In fact, what I did before was I just took one of my rulers and I would hold it here up this way and then cut along the edge of that just to leave enough space to cover. But this is pretty inconsistent, especially if you have shaky hands like me. So I did invest in some of these. They fit on the edge of your journal and they leave just enough space here to cover your journal cover. They have different thicknesses of ones. So like this one would be, leave like a lot more space. You would use this if you have a really thick journal cover and thick fabric, so you have more room to work with. And then they have really thin ones like the one we're going to use today that just leaves a tiny bit of space, because our fabric is pretty thin, our book board is pretty thin. we don't need a whole bunch of fabric to cover that edge. So this is the one we're gonna use. It's 2 millimeters. And so I'm gonna put that there. The boss has to come by and check and see how progress is going. So we'll wait for the inspection. Make sure we have the all clear, and then we'll get back to work. Yep, I think we're ready. So I'm just gonna put my little jig right there in the corner, and it makes it super easy to trim those corners. How neat is that, right? And then as you can see, well, let me see if I can get you up here so you can see. It leaves just enough fabric right there on that edge. Can you see that? If I fold it over with my finger, to cover that little corner without having any extra. So now when we go to fold, we'll have just enough to cover that little edge and fold it in. And we'll have a nice tidy little edge or corner. Isn't that neat? All right. I will link these for you guys too. They came from Amazon. Don't you love Amazon? It's like the best. All right. So here's what we're working with. We have our completely trimmed down journal cover with our fabric, and now we are ready to do the gluing for the edges. And this is the part that I feel like is probably the most difficult. Did y'all hear Lizzie doing her thing? Are you done? Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and glue this down. Head first, tail next, and then we do the sides. All right, let's get our glue mat back out. And we're gonna start gluing. When I'm gluing the edges down, I do like to make sure that I get the glue on this edge as well, so that the fabric sticks around the edges of the book. So we're gonna be mindful of that. And then we just wanna make sure that we get all of this fabric glued down. You wanna have a bone folder ready, because we're gonna need a bone folder. I have two that I really like. I like this little guy because he has this really thick edge, and that works really well in your hinge gaps. And then I have my regular bone folder here. All right, let's get going. We're gonna just start gluing those edges down. I generally do the book board first because it tends to dry out so fast, and then I just come right back to the book board after I get the edges glued down. All right, so we're doing that. And then I'm gonna go right along the edge there and get those edges glued down. I also like to glue in the hinge gap. I don't know if that's the proper way to do it or not, but that's what I like to do. Again, if you're worried about glue getting on your fabric, you're not gonna do that part because obviously glue is gonna get on the fabric if you're gluing in the middle of your hinge gaps. We're drying out a little bit. Let's put a little more glue here. Here and there. All right, and then you want to work quickly with this. Start in the center right over your spine, and you're going to pull that fabric down. You want to get it nice and snug along that edge. I like to start from the outside then and pull inward and toward the spine, so we end up with a little bit of extra fabric for that hinge gap. So starting from the outside, and then I pull inward toward the bottom of the book and toward that spine, and you see you end up with a little bit of, can you see that? We got a little loose fabric right there that we're gonna work into that hinge gap, because you need that little bit of extra fabric to work down into there. Is this the proper technique? I don't really know, but I did find that this works really well for me, and I have good results when I do it this way. So you guys, if you're like a professional bookbinder and you're watching this and you're cringing, I'm so sorry. Look, I'm just a girl that likes to make junk journals, okay? I don't really know what I'm doing half the time. I just find things that work well for myself, and I thought I would share them with you guys, okay? So y'all have a little grace for your girl here. She don't really know what she's doing half the time. She's just, you know, she likes crafting, okay? All right, so that's looking nice and clean. Can you see how tight that looks around that edge, and that hinge gap is looking nice and tidy there? The next step is to run your bone folder along the edge, pushing up against your book so that you get a nice glue contact and everything is nice and straight and tidy. And we're gonna make sure we have everything laid down nice and tight. Now, normally I would go a little bit faster than that, but since I'm talking to you guys and trying to show you what I'm doing, it's a little bit slower, but I think I still got good contact while all that glue was still wet. So I think we're good. Everything seems to be stuck down really well. We're gonna repeat all those steps for this side, and then I'll show you what to do about these corners when we go to the edge. The corners are the hardest part to me. You don't have very much time to work and you're trying to get everything glued down nice and tidy, but I feel like when you take your time and really work on this, like the skeleton of your journal, that it just turns out looking so much neater. And I don't know, it gives kind of a more professional look, I think, when you have your tidy edges and everything stuck down nice and neat. So I like to take some extra time when I'm building my journal to make sure that it looks nice and put together. You want it to look handmade, but not really homemade. You know what I mean? There's kind of a difference. All right, I'm getting those edges real good. Getting in those hinge gaps again. Refreshing the glue. All right, remember we're starting in the center. We're pulling straight down toward the bottom of the journal. We get that spine stuck down, and then we run right to the outside. And this time we're pulling down and in toward the book so that we end up with any extra fabric in that hinge gap, so that we have a little bit of extra fabric there to press down. And then you jump to the other edge, pull in straight down on that edge and in toward the center of the book, so that we end up with a little tiny bit of extra fabric in that hinge gap. And I think you can probably, can y'all see the little wrinkles that are happening in the hinge gap? It just kind of happens naturally when you tug the fabric in that direction. Can you see that? We end up with those little pockets right there. Can you see the extra fabric right there? And then we're gonna make that fabric lay down in the center of the hinge gap. That way it glues to the edges of those book boards and to the glue that we put down in the hinge gap, and it just looks so nice and tidy and neat. And there's no buckling, and the pages look, I mean, the book cover looks nice and neat. Working that down in there with a bone folder. And then we're gonna smush those edges so that they're nice and tight, glued down, and everything is nice and sharp and square and crisp. And it just looks so nice once you get it. And then you can check your edges. But yeah, look how neat that is. Neat as a pin. Okay, that one looks good. Make sure we got everything kind of pushed and smushed. Now, let's talk about this edge. Our primary concern is getting these little corners stuck down, okay? The rest of this is gonna just work out on its own. So you wanna pay close attention to these first, and then the rest of it's just gonna fall in place. You don't really have to worry about that so much. we're doing the same thing, adding a good bit of glue along here and along this edge. You kind of get a better view of what the glue's doing on the edge. But also I'm kind of working it into those little edges there to get the corners nice and filled up with glue. And then what we're going to do, I usually just take my fingernail and smush that little corner right over the edge there. And you may or may not be able to see what I've just done, but we're working that teeny tiny little 1 millimeter of fabric over the edge so that our corner is covered with fabric. Can you see that? Let's do this side. So we're going to take our fingernail and work that little fabric right over the edge there. And once that's covered, then we'll just go ahead and pull the fabric straight down. I start in the center, and then on this one, I just pull it straight down. We're not trying to work extra fabric in any direction. We just want that to come straight down. All right. Do your best to avoid wrinkles. And we're going to do the same thing, getting our edges nice and crisp and tidy. And then let me show you what we're working with. This is the 2 millimeter. Can y'all see that? Look how nice and neat that looks already. Here's the 3 millimeter. Can you see that we have a little extra fabric? Come on, camera. Can you see that? It just pops up, which is not a big deal. We've got glue there and we're gonna smush it down. But I think that is why I usually use the 2 millimeter, so I don't end up with that little tiny bit of fabric that I need to work into place. Smush this guy down. They look the same after everything's said and done, to be honest with you. I think either will be just fine. I think it's just personal preference, really. So I'm making sure that those edges and those corners are nice and sharp. Everything's smushed down really nicely and glued down. And that's what we're working with. Look how sharp and clean that is. Doesn't that look nice? There's our 3 millimeter side. So yeah. All right. And as soon as we get that done, we're headed over to this side to do the same thing. This is the edge that I got a little cardboard in, so I'm not sure, or a little bit of bookboard. We're going to see how that works out. It's going to be fine. But we're going to do the same thing. We're adding glue to the edge, making sure we get all up in that little corner there. All up in that corner. And then we're going to refresh the glue on the front. Ooh, that was a lot of glue. Okay, there we go. Taking our nail and folding that little teeny tiny bit of fabric over. Same thing on this side, making sure we're covered. My bookboard wants to bow up a little bit on this corner. I think it was kind of damaged in shipping a little bit, so we'll see if I can get that smoothed down. And then we're pulling the fabric straight down this time, all the way across. And gluing it down. Pulling the fabric taut straight down. Trying to avoid wrinkles. And both of these edges were done with a 3 millimeter, so we're gonna try to manipulate that fabric to lay down. And this is the corner that was damaged, so it's being a bit of a problem child. All right, let's see what we got going on over here. That one's good. Let's get that edge nice and sharp. Corners sharp. Smush, smush, smush. Yep. It looks good, guys. Look at that. I mean, that's pretty neat. See how sharp that is? Let's see if we can get it to focus a little bit. This is the one that was bowed up a little bit, so He might not be the best one to show you, but look how tight this one is. Y'all ignore all the strings. We're going to take care of that in just a second. But look how nice and neat that is. So now, essentially, we have our cover. Look at that. Let me move this and clean my area a little bit, and I'm going to show you what I meant about the hinge gaps. One other thing I normally do that I didn't do today, I trim all these little strings. Let's go ahead and let's do this thing right. We're going to trim all these little strings off. Because anytime you have these little threads and strings, they will show through whatever you put on top of them. So we're going to add our end pages, our end papers to the cover for our inside covers. And you'll see the little strings underneath that, which is fine if you're going for that look. You could like hit them with a little sandpaper and make it like a little distressed wrinkle. But today I'm going to go ahead and trim them. Most of them anyway. See what we can do with these. All right, and now that that's nice and neat, we have the bulk of those trimmed out. Oop, come here. Okay. You can spend as much time with this being finicky as you want, but it's going to be fun. And then I take a little bit of glue and I just kind of go along the edges and make sure everything is glued down nice and well on the inside of the cover. And I am pulling from the outside of the journal in so that if we do have any of those little strings, they're all pointing kind of down and away from the edge of the journal. And it'll stick anything down that we might have missed. And hopefully it won't be too noticeable. I have a little bit of damage to my book board over here, which we will address in an upcoming video. If you were noticing that little spot there. Paying particular attention to these little corners because that's where we want our best work to be, nice and tight on those little corners. I don't think this step is absolutely necessary, but I always do it, so I thought I would show you guys exactly how I do mine. You probably could skip this step if everything's glued down and nice and tight from your earlier steps. I just feel like it kind of gives it a neater look when you go to put your end papers on. Got that glued down. Okay. Now, this is looking just right. Okay, what I'm going to do is let this dry for a second while I go wash my hands and my brush because we're done with the glue. I'm going to go get my glue fingers taken care of and then I'll come back. This will be dry and we'll talk about hinge gaps. We are all dry and finished up for today. We have our little blank journal cover ready to go to be decorated. It looks nice and neat. Oh, here you go. You can see the glue. Can you see the little dark spots that came through with the glue? So that's what you would want to use. Like if you're going to be using a decorative fabric and you're not going to put anything on the front of your cover, you're not going to paint it or do any mixed media or anything, you might want to take the time to make yourself some book cloth that has a paper lining. That way the paper lining will catch all of your glue and you won't have any of this like darkness from the glue coming through. We're not worried about it because we're going to do some super special things to this journal cover. So here it is. This is what it'll look like as a journal. Isn't that sweet? He's a little guy. Look, he's just a little guy. So the hinge gaps, the purpose of those is so that you have room for your covers to fold on top of one another, because if the cover was to meet the other and you didn't have a hinge gap, there would be friction, like they would meet one another and it would be hard to close. But as it is, you have that fabric that can fold forward instead, so you can have your covers sit directly in front of your spine like this. And this is how it's meant to sit, like this. So you see we have that hinge gap. It folds right over onto the spine like this, and it's nice and neat and tidy. And then you have your little journal, and it is just, it's adorable. It's so sweet. I love it. I can't wait to show you guys what we're gonna do with this one. This is gonna be, I think, a really cool project. I was inspired to make something super colorful and fun by a little package that a subscriber sent to me. So this is going to be a fun one. I think it's going to be mixed media, which is not generally my forte. So it'll be a little challenging too. So you guys will have to stay tuned to see what this little guy turns into. But yeah, that is Junk Journal cover 101. This is like the most basic thing that you can do, and you can make a bunch of these up and have them ready to go so that you could decorate them. I brought a few examples in here to show you of journals that started out just like this, just a little basic cover. And the first one is this guy, and it was made with the exact same broadcloth, and then this one was painted. So I made a cover just exactly like this one with glue spots and all, and then I painted it with acrylic paint and then sanded it down, and it gives this super smooth, like soft, I mean, just like a book that you would get from the library. That's what it feels like, one that's covered in fabric. It is just so smooth. And my favorite part of this one of those strings got underneath of the fabric on my cover, and when I sanded it down, that's what it did. So don't worry too much about those little stringies, because they can turn into happy accidents. But yeah, check this little cover out. It's so neat and tidy, and it started out just like that first guy, and now it's a beautiful junk journal. Isn't that cool? I love how something so simple can turn into something that's beautiful like this. Here's another one. This is one that you would want to be more careful with, because I used Tim Holtz fabric, but it's still just a basic journal cover that I put fabric on a journal. I was a little more persnickety about my glue. I did not use book cloth though. This is just regular old fabric stuck to bookboard. Like, there's glue, so you can do it without making your fabric, your book cloth fabric. You just have to be a little bit more careful. And then this one's really plain. On the inside has some tabs, but still just a little basic junk journal. And then we have some that are covered with pretty fabric and then have embellishments on them. So this one turned out great. There were no big gluey areas or glue spots on this one, but I decided to put like this really cool little embellishment on the front. So if you did have a big glue spot somewhere, you can always decorate your journal to hide those. And I thought that this might be a good example. Even though that didn't happen with this particular journal, you totally could hide a multitude of sins with just pretty decorations. So that's an idea. There's a look at that one. And then here's another guy that started out just like that little plain journal, but I covered it with acrylic paint. I painted it, and then I added some, I think this is like air dry clay that I mixed with paint and made these like really cool textured areas. Cut a hole in the front of it, added this little embellishment with a butterfly, and it's got some little like shaker elements to it. And then this one has really broad bands, so I saved some of that book board and made some faux bands on this one, which is kind of a cool look too. So there's so much you can do with just a basic build to take it farther and to keep decorating and embellishing. But it all starts out with just that plain little simple junk journal cover. Every single one of them starts out with fabric on bookboard, just like that. And then you just have so many possibilities after you get the the basics down. So yeah, so there's that one. Ooh, that's cool. I forgot about that. Have that like embossed paper on there. It's got a really cool feel, texture to it. Yeah, and look at this one. You can see all the way through that. That's cool. I forgot I made this journal. Look at that. Okay. Go me. That's neat. We might do a flip through of this one day. I forgot I made this little journal. It's all about the butterfly wings. So that is the conclusion of our first part of our basics series. If you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to leave those in the comments. I love when you guys comment and talk to me down there. It just makes me so happy that you guys want to talk and share about our crafting adventures, and I don't know, it's just a whole lot of fun for me to see comments. I love it. So if you have any questions or comments, leave those down there. I will get back with you. I think I answer everybody. If I don't, that's unintentional, so message me again. But yeah, this can get you so far with junk journals if you just kind of figure out how to put together a basic junk journal cover. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it wasn't like super boring for you. Thank you again for all your well wishes for my dad and your thoughts and your prayers and all your kind comments and your support. You will never know how much I appreciate that, truly. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have questions, leave them for me. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys. Can you see that, guys? How nice and tight and tidy that is right there in the hinge gap? That's what we're shooting for. We're not really worried about all of these all of that's going to go away. We're not worried about that. We're worried about the profile of it, how thin it is, how tidy the edges are and crisp those edges are. That was our concern today. All of these little strings and fuzzies and things, we're not worried about that. We're not worried about blemishes here. We're worried about these corners being nice and tight. Can you see that? How tight that little corner is. And neat. Crispy little edges. That's what we want. Let me show you guys. When your book is closed, this is how your hinge gaps function. They should sit right in front of your spine like that.